you ever walked through the empty halls of your school after everyone's gone home? That echoing silence, the way the light from the streetlights filters in through the high windows, turning familiar classrooms into shadowy, unfamiliar spaces. It's different, isn't it? Usually, it's just creepy. But what if, just for a moment, you felt something else? Something watching, something waiting. Because for Jimmy and Carol, in the unassuming town of Oak Haven, Idaho, their high school wasn't just a place of learning. It was a place of prey, and their story, it's one that will make you rethink every late-night study session, every forgotten locker, every creak and groan your school building makes. All right, if you're brave enough to dive into this, then buckle up. And hey, while you're here, if you find this story chilling your bones, give that like button a tap, hit subscribe for more tales of terror, and let me know in the comments below if your school has any creepy urban legends. Your support helps us tell more stories that keep you up at night. It was a late Friday afternoon in late October, the kind where the sun dipped early, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. Jimmy and Carol, both juniors at Blackwood High, were the last two lingering in Mrs. Davison's art room. They weren't exactly friends, but more like creative co-conspirators. Jimmy, the quiet one, usually buried in his sketchpad, had a knack for hyper-realistic charcoal drawings. Carol, all vibrant colors and chaotic energy, expressed herself through abstract painting. Today, they were finishing up a collaborative mural project, a swirling, dreamlike landscape that stretched across one of the art room walls. The light outside was fading fast, but the fluorescent hum of the classroom lights was unwavering, casting a sterile glow. Mrs. Davison had left an hour ago, trusting them to lock up. Just this last bit of sky, Carol muttered, her brush dancing across the wall, adding a final streak of deep indigo. Jimmy, standing back, observed their work. It's good. Almost makes you forget we're in Blackwood High. Carol scoffed, as if anything could make you forget this place. Haven't you heard the whispers, Jimmy, about the North Wing? He rolled his eyes. Urban legends, every school has them. The old janitor who lost his mind, the ghost of a prom queen. No, this is different, Carol said, her voice dropping, though she still sounded more intrigued than scared. My cousin, who graduated last year, told me. They say the North Wing was sealed off for a reason. Not just because it's old, but because something happened there. Something they don't want anyone to know about. The North Wing. It was a bricked-up section of the school, visible only from the outside, with windows long since darkened and boarded. Nobody had been inside it for decades. It was supposedly just condemned. Suddenly, a cold gust of air swept through the room, making their canvas sheets rustle. The lights flickered, once, twice, then steadied. Just the old building settling, Jimmy said, trying to sound nonchalant, but he felt a prickle of unease. The windows were closed. There was no breeze. Carol turned, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Or maybe it's Blackwood High saying hello. What if we just took a peek? Not into the North Wing itself, but maybe around it. See if there's any way in. You feel a pull, don't you? That mix of fear and exhilarating curiosity. The kind that says, don't do it, but every fiber of your being screams, go on, just a little look. Jimmy hesitated. We're supposed to lock up and leave. Precisely why this is the perfect time, Carol grinned. No teachers, no security cameras down that hall. Just us. Think of the stories we could tell. Against his better judgment and the growing chill that wasn't just from the autumn air, Jimmy found himself agreeing. They cleaned their brushes quickly, gathered their things, and with a shared, nervous glance, slipped out of the art room, leaving the mural shimmering under the cold fluorescent light. The hallway outside was a long, silent tunnel. Their footsteps echoed, unnervingly loud. Every shadow seemed to stretch and shift as they approached the corridor leading to the north wing, a service passage usually locked. The air grew perceptibly colder. Jimmy swore he could hear a faint, almost melodic buzzing sound, like an old, forgotten transformer. "You hear that?" he whispered. Carol nodded, her eyes wide. "Sounds like a lullaby but warped." The passage ended at a heavy, reinforced steel door, rusted and scarred. A faded danger, "Do not enter." Sin was barely visible beneath layers of grime. But what truly caught their attention was the lock. It had been tampered with. Not just broken, but as if something had melted the metal right around the padlock mechanism. "No way," Jimmy breathed. "Someone got in." Carol reached out, her fingers just hovering over the cool metal. Or something got out. A low, guttural thud resonated from behind the door, followed by a metallic scrape. It sounded like a desk being dragged across a concrete floor. A shiver ran down your spine. Do you retreat? Or does the thrill outweigh the terror? "We have to," Carol whispered, her eyes fixed on the door. "We have to see." Slowly, carefully, Jimmy pushed against the door. It grated open with a groan that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the school. Beyond it, the darkness was absolute, thick and suffocating. The air was stale, musty, and carried a faint, unsettling scent, like ozone mixed with something sweet and sickly, like decay. They pulled out their phone flashlights, the beams cutting weak paths through the gloom. The corridor was narrow, lined with dusty lockers, some still bearing faded stickers from decades past. The buzzing sound here was louder, more distinct, occasionally punctuated by what sounded like faint, disembodied whispers just beyond the range of understanding. "Hello," Carol called out, her voice barely a tremor. Only the echo answered. As they moved deeper, the whispers grew. They weren't words, not exactly, but a chaotic swirl of fragmented sounds. A girl's giggle, a boy's startled gasp, the faint scratching of chalk on a blackboard, all layered with that disquieting hum. The temperature plummeted further, their breath fogging in front of them. It felt like walking into a freezer that smelled of forgotten fears. Jimmy's flashlight beam caught something on a locker door. A series of crude, frantic scratch marks, deep gouges in the metal, forming what looked like an eye staring out. Another flicker of light revealed more. On the wall opposite, written in something dark and dried, were the words, "Don't look for us." "Carol, maybe we should go," Jimmy urged, his voice tight, but Carol was transfixed. She pointed further down the hall. "Look, a classroom." The classroom door was ajar, spilling a faint, pulsating light. It was a sickly, greenish yellow, reminiscent of old cathode ray tubes. Hesitantly, they peered inside. It was a biology lab, untouched for decades. Rows of dusty desks, a periodic table hanging askew on the wall. But in the center, on a large metal table, was an elaborate, archaic-looking piece of equipment. Wires snaked everywhere, connecting to old glass bulbs filled with a strange, viscous liquid that glowed faintly. It hummed, and the buzzing intensified here. And then you saw it, reflected in the glass of a dusty display case. Just for a split second, a child's face. Pale, gaunt, its eyes wide and vacant. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. Did you see that? You want to scream, but no sound comes. Suddenly, the whispers surged, no longer fragmented, but forming a cacophony of panicked, pleading voices that swirled around them like a vortex. The lights in the lab pulsed faster. The equipment on the table worried ominously. The sickly yellow glow intensified, bathing the room in an oppressive, unnatural light. The air grew heavy, thick with unseen energy. The desks slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to vibrate. Then, one of the old wooden stools scraped across the floor, as if dragged by an unseen hand. "It's not just a ghost," Carol breathed, her face pale. "It's something else. This whole wing, it's like a battery." On a chalkboard at the front of the lab, faint white lines began to appear, scrawling themselves rapidly. It wasn't chalk. It was etching into the slate. Words formed. "We are trapped. The memory machine. They took everything, and now they want you." Before they could even process the chilling message, a sudden, violent surge of energy ripped through the room. The lights in the lab exploded, showering them in sparks. The equipment in the center of the room flared within a blinding green light, and from it, a horrifying multi-voiced scream erupted, a chorus of agony and rage that tore through their very bones. The door to the lab slammed shut, throwing them into complete darkness. The hall outside them seemed to twist and contort. The lockers began to clatter violently, as if 1,000 unseen hands were pounding on them from the inside. They heard heavy footsteps, not human, but dragging, shuffling, coming closer. "Run," Jimmy yelled, his voice hoarse, grabbing Carol's arm. They stumbled back, their flashlights dancing wildly, picking out fleeting, nightmarish glimpses, shadows, stretching impossibly long eyes gleaming in the dark corners, the indistinct forms of children lurking just beyond the light. The voices screamed, incoherent now, but full of terrifying intent. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before them, twisting and turning. Walls that had been straight now seemed to curve in on themselves. They ran, their lungs burning, the horrific cacophony of the trapped entities clawing at their sanity. They could feel unseen hands tearing at their hair, pulling at their clothes, hear wet, ragged breaths right behind them. Can you feel that chill? That's not just the air conditioning. That's Blackwood High. And once you hear this, you might just feel it too, before I dive into the deep end. If you're brave enough to stick around for the whole ride, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Seriously, it helps this story reach more people. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there has felt something similar. And if you're really feeling it, subscribe. You don't want to miss what else might crawl out of the shadows. And please, please leave a comment telling me the weirdest thing that's ever happened in your school. I need to know I'm not alone in this. Okay, deep breath. It all started last fall in Oak Haven, Ohio, Blackwood High. An old building, brick facade, ivy crawling up the walls like skeletal fingers. Most schools have their ghosts, right? Locker room, spirits, phantom footsteps in empty halls. But Blackwood had something else, something that felt hungry. My name's Bradley. I was just trying to get through junior year. My best friend, Alex, was the resident skeptic, always armed with a sarcastic remark. And then there was Chloe. Chloe saw things. Not literally, usually, but she felt vibes. She picked up on energies. She was the one who first mentioned it. A hushed whisper during lunch about the old, condemned north wing. They say it's locked off for a reason, she'd said, picking at her salad. Not because of asbestos, like the principal claims, but because of Sarah. Sarah, the name itself felt like a cold stone dropping into my stomach. Sarah Miller vanished without a trace in 1987, last seen by her locker 237 in that very north wing. The official story was she ran away, but the unofficial story, the one whispered in hushed tones between classes, was that something in that wing had taken her, and it was still there, waiting. That Alex rolled his eyes. Please, Chloe. It's an old building. Things creak, lights flicker. It's not a ghost. But Chloe's gaze was fixed on the far wall, as if she could see right through it to the forbidden wing. It's more than a ghost, Alex. People felt things. They heard whispers. And then, after Sarah, the wing was sealed. No one goes in. That night, a stupid dare bloomed between us. Not even a dare, really. Just a growing, undeniable curiosity. What was behind that locked door? What did it feel like in there? So, after school, armed with a flimsy pry bar Alex snagged from his dad's shed, we stood before the padlocked double doors of the north wing. The air around them was noticeably colder. Even though it was a warm autumn day, the metal felt like ice under my fingers. Okay, this is stupid, Alex muttered. But he was already working the pry bar. With a groan of tortured metal, the lock snapped. A gust of stale, dust-filled air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of decay and something else, something metallic, like old blood. The hallway beyond was absolute black. No natural light, no functioning electricity. Our phone flashlights cut weak beams through the gloom, revealing peeling paint, warped floorboards, and a thick carpet of dust. It felt like walking into a tomb. Hello, Chloe's voice, usually bright, was a thin thread of sound. It was immediately swallowed by the oppressive silence. We walked slowly, our footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every creak of the old building sounded like a footstep behind us. We passed row after row of silent, empty lockers. Then, chillingly, we saw it. Locked in its own little island of darkness, bathed in the feeble glow of my phone, was locker 237. It didn't look special, just an old, scratched metal locker. But as I approached it, the air around it dropped further. My breath plumed. My phone screen flickered violently, then died. Alex and Chloe's did the same. We were plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. My phone. Alex whispered, his voice cracking. And then, from inside locker 237, a faint scratching sound began. Faint at first, then growing louder, like desperate fingernails dragging on metal. My heart was beating like a drum against my ribs. Chloe let out a small, terrified whimper. Click, the locker door, 237, suddenly sprang open with a sharp, metallic sound. It revealed not an empty interior, but a swirling, inky blackness that seemed to absorb all light, even the residual glow from our dying phone screens. And from that void, a voice, a whisper, slithered out. It was distorted, barely audible, like someone speaking through thick water. Lonely, so lonely. That was all it took. We didn't need to see anything else. We didn't need another sound. The sheer, suffocating dread that radiated from that open locker was enough. We bolted, tripping over each other, blindly clawing our way back to the main doors. our lungs burning, the horrific whisper echoing in our minds. We got out, gasping, shaking, scrambling to relock the doors, fumbling with the broken padlock until it clicked shut with a pathetic finality. We never spoke about it clearly after that. Not with each other, not with anyone else. What could we say that a locker spoke to us? That a void of despair opened up in our high school? Alex, the skeptic, was pale and quiet for days. Chloe couldn't even look at the north wing without flinching, but for me, Bradley, it was different. I felt connected to it, like something had latched onto me. The nightmares started. Not typical nightmares, but waking dreams. I'd see Sarah's face, not as a girl, but as a shifting, featureless mask of terror, floating in that inky blackness. I'd hear the scratching, always the scratching, just beneath my floorboards, behind my closet door, and the whisper, lonely, so lonely, it followed me. The cold spots in my room, the way my phone would suddenly freeze and display a static-filled image of the north wing hallway. Once, I swear, I saw a shadow dart past my window at night, too tall, too thin, moving, with a jerky, unnatural gait. The worst part, I started to feel lonely. Not just regular teenage loneliness, but an oppressive, crushing solitude, as if I was the only person left on Earth. It was like the entity from Locker 237 was trying to infest my mind, to make me feel what Sarah must have felt, to drag me down into its endless despair. I started avoiding school, avoiding people. I'd glance at Alex and Chloe and see the fear in their eyes, the unspoken terror that bound us. And I knew it wasn't just my imagination. The last time I saw something truly disturbing, it was in the school library. I was alone, trying to study, but the cold had followed me. I looked up, and through the glass doors of the library, across the main hall, I saw it. The north wing doors. And for a split second, Locker 237, its door wide open, was visible down. That long, dark corridor, in its mouth, a faint, pulsing red light. And then, standing right in front of it, was a figure. Tall, slender, a young girl, Sarah. She turned her head slowly, her eyes, or where her eyes should be, glowing that same terrifying red. And she was looking directly at me. The red light intensified, pulsating, and I felt a searing pain. In my head, a scream building in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, trembling. When I opened them, the hallway was normal. The doors to the north wing were just old doors, padlocked, dark. But I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. I still go to Blackwood High, but I never look at the north wing. I don't dare. Because sometimes, when I'm walking down the hall, I feel that inexplicable drop in temperature. And sometimes, just on the edge of hearing, I think I can still hear it. That low, guttural whisper, not like a cry for help, but like a promise of shared despair, lonely, so lonely forever. What do you think happened to Sarah? And what do you think is still waiting in Locker 237? Because I have a horrible feeling it never truly left the school. Or maybe it never left. Me, good night everyone, and sleep tight. You never know what's waiting in the dark corners of your own world. It was October 2012, in the sleepy little town of Millhaven, Oregon. The kind of place where autumn meant endless rain, fog creeping in from the woods, and an almost suffocating quiet. And at the heart of it all was Millhaven High, an old, brick monolith that had seen generations of restless teenagers, whispered secrets, and, apparently, a few things that went bump in the night. Our story isn't about the popular kids, the jocks, or the cheerleaders. It's about Johnny and Cassandra. You know the type, the quiet ones, the ones who hung out in the library after school, the ones who preferred the company of a good graphic novel or a coding project to a Friday night football game. They were best friends, practically inseparable, bound by a shared quirky sense of humor and a mutual disdain for forced social interactions. This particular night, they were stuck at school late, not for detention, not for a forgotten project, but for Spirit Week decorations. Mrs. Henderson, the perpetually frazzled art teacher, had somehow roped them into painting a truly colossal banner for the upcoming homecoming game. It was past 9 p.m. The school was a cavernous tomb of echoing silence, and the only other living soul was a grumpy janitor who seemed to communicate only through grunts and the furious squeak of his mop. "Seriously, Cass," Johnny muttered, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings of the gymnasium. Whose idea was it to paint a cougar with glowing eyes? He gestured with a paint-splattered brush at the monstrous, half-finished mascot on the canvas. Cassandra, perched precariously on a rickety ladder, meticulously outlining a claw, just sighed. "Mrs. Henderson's, obviously. She said it would capture the spirit." She paused. "Mostly, I think it's just capturing my will to live." The lights in the gym flickered. Not a quick blink, but a slow, deliberate dimming and brightening, like the school itself was taking a breath. Johnny shivered. "Okay, that's officially creepy." "Just the old wiring," Cassandra said, but her voice held a slight tremor. "You would have noticed it if you were there." The air, usually thick with the smell of old gym socks and floor wax, suddenly felt different, colder, heavier. They returned to their work, trying to ignore the subtle shifts. The steady hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to waver, and every now and then, a faint, metallic clink would echo from somewhere deep within the school, like someone dropping coins down a long, dark well. "Hey, you hear that?" Johnny whispered, freezing with his paintbrush mid-stroke. Cassandra tilted her head. "Hear what?" Then it came again, clearer this time. A low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across concrete. Coming from the old science wing, which was supposedly locked off after hours. Probably just Mr. Peterson, the janitor, Johnny tried. But even he didn't sound convinced. Mr. Peterson mainly stuck to the ground floor. The sound was definitely from upstairs, and it sounded sloppier than a mop bucket. Curiosity, that notorious killer of cats and teenagers in horror movies, began to gnaw at them. "Let's check it out," Cassandra said, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. You probably would have said no, but these two, they were drawn to it like moths to a flickering flame. Armed with their phone flashlights, they tiptoed out of the gym. The main hallway stretched out before them, an endless tunnel of lockers and shadows. The lights here were even dimmer, some completely out, casting long, distorted figures from the empty trophy cases. Every step they took felt amplified, there, whispers swallowed by the vast silence. The dragging sound was louder now, accompanied by a faint, wet slap. It was definitely coming from the science wing, at the very end of the second-floor hallway. "Maybe it's a burst pipe," Johnny offered, his bravado fading with every step. They reached the double doors leading to the wing. They were supposed to be locked, but tonight, one was ajar, a sliver of inky blackness visible beyond it. A cold draft spilled out, carrying with it a faint, sickly, sweet odor, something like old blood mixed with formaldehyde. Click. Cassandra pushed the door open farther. The wing was plunged into total darkness, save for the weak beams of their phone lights. Empty classrooms lined both sides, their doors slightly ajar, revealing glints of lab equipment and the faint silhouettes of dissected frogs in jars. The dragging sound had stopped. Now there was a different sound, a low, guttural breathing, like someone struggling for air, coming from the last classroom on the left. Biology. No, 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 Johnny whispered, tugging at Cassandra's sleeve. This is a bad idea. We should go. But Cassandra was already moving, her flashlight beam dancing. Ahead, just a peek. Johnny, what if someone's hurt? You probably wouldn't have gone in. You'd have run, but they didn't. They crept towards the biology lab. The breathing grew heavier, more ragged. Along the floor, leading to the classroom, was a faint, glistening trail. It looked wet and dark. Cassandra pushed the classroom door open slowly, a long, agonizing creak splitting the silence. The beam of her flashlight swept across the room, overturned desks, shattered beakers, and then it landed on the source of the breathing dot. In the center of the room, standing completely still, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, and draped in what looked like an old, tattered custodian's uniform. Its back was to them. Its head was bowed. Its breath rasped in the stillness. Then slowly, excruciatingly slowly, it began to turn. Johnny's heart hammered against his ribs. Cassandra instinctively raised her phone higher, the light catching something. It wasn't a face, not truly. Where a head should have been, there was an elongated, pale grey mass, smooth and featureless, tapering to a point. And on its surface, not eyes, not a mouth, but dozens of tiny, almost imperceptible nubs that seemed to pulse faintly, like miniature heartbeats. A low, vibrating hum filled the room, coming from the creature. It wasn't a sound of aggression, but of ... observation. It was studying them. Its arm, long and skeletal, slowly lifted, pointing a single, elongated finger directly at Johnny . Then, from the featureless mass, a sound emerged. Not a voice, but a cacophony of whispers, overlapping, disjointed, yet chillingly familiar. Johnny, Johnny, don't forget the mascot. Glowing eyes. It was Mrs. Henderson's voice, and then Cassandra's, warped and distorted, capture. The spirit. The creature took a single, shuffling step towards them, and they finally saw its feet. They weren't feet at all, but two smooth, dark, fleshy stumps that left that glistening dark trail on the linoleum floor. That was all it took. Raw animal terror seized them. Johnny screamed, a choked, high-pitched sound. Cassandra dropped her phone, the beam skittering wildly across the room as they turned and bolted. They ran, blindly, purely on instinct. They didn't look back. The whispers echoed behind them, growing louder, multiplying, filling the entire wing, becoming a desperate, frantic chorus of every voice they had ever heard in that school. Footsteps, wet and slapping, pursued them. They burst out of the science wing, down the stairs, through the main hall, not caring about the noise they made. The school felt alive around them now, the shadows stretching and clutching, the air growing colder, carrying that sickly sweet scent. Doors slammed shut down unseen corridors. Lockers rattled. They could feel eyes on them from every darkened classroom. Finally, gasping near collapse, They burst through the main exit doors into the cold, damp Oregon night. The fresh air hit them like a physical blow, shocking them back to reality. They didn't stop running until they reached Johnny's house. Miles away, their lungs burning, their minds reeling. They never talked about it. Not really. Not to each other, not to their parents, and certainly not to the police. What would they say? That they saw a faceless thing whispering their names in the old biology lab. They went back to school the next day. The science wing was locked under maintenance, the school principal announced. The janitor, Mr. Peterson, was unusually quiet, his eyes darting around as if searching for something. Johnny and Cassandra finished the Spirit Week banner. The cougar's eyes still glowed, but now, to them, they held a knowing, cold light. Every time they walked through the school, a phantom chill grazed their skin. Every fleeting shadow seemed to hold a hint of that elongated form. Every quiet whisper in the hall made them flinch. You see, some things, once seen, can't be unseen. And some places, once disturbed, never quite let you go. Johnny and Cassandra both transferred schools by the end of the year, claiming different opportunities. But they knew the truth. Sometimes, a school isn't just a building. It's a memory, a vessel, a place where echoes of the past can coalesce into something else. Something that learns, something that remembers. So next time you're alone in your school after dark, or walking down a hallway that feels just a little too quiet, just remember, you might not be alone. And sometimes, what you discover discovers you right back. What do you think lived in Millhaven High? Let me know in the comments. Sleep tight. It was a crisp October evening in Oak Haven, Vermont, the kind where the air bites at your cheeks and the leafless trees look like skeletal fingers clawing at the twilight sky. You, Bobby, were sprawled on your bed, scrolling through your phone, when the group chat lit up. Alex, your best friend ever, the daredevil, had just dropped the bomb tonight. West Wing, midnight. Who's in your stomach did a little flip. The West Wing, everyone knew the legends. It was the oldest part of Oak Haven High, abandoned since the 70s after a structural incident that was never fully explained. Rumors, however, filled the void. An old boiler explosion, a student vanishing without a trace, even whispers of a forbidden club that met there before it was sealed off. They called it the Whispering Wing because, they said, if you listened closely, you could hear faint, mournful cries carried on the wind, even on the calmest nights. Most people wrote it off as an urban legend, a way to scare freshmen, but you, Alex and Sarah, who was already texting back with a nervous, "Are you insane?" were always drawn to the dark edges of things. You typed back, a knot of dread and excitement tightening in your chest. "I'm in, but we're bringing flashlights, and maybe a crucifix." That night, the clock ticked excruciatingly slow. At 11:45 p.m., you slipped out of your house, meeting Alex and Sarah behind the deserted school gym. The air was colder now, pressing in, and the moon, a sliver of silver, did little to pierce the oppressive darkness shrouding the old building. Oak Haven High loomed, a monstrous, silent shadow. "All right, mission briefing," Alex whispered, his breath clouding in the cold. "Front doors are no go. We're going through the old utility tunnel behind the boiler room. Found a grate unlocked this afternoon." You felt a shiver trace a path down your spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The boiler room was adjacent to the West Wing, "You sure about this, Alex?" you asked, your voice barely a whisper, scared. "Bobby," Sarah teased, but her voice wavered, betraying her own jitters. She clutched a small, worn rosary her grandmother had given her. You gripped your heavy-duty flashlight tighter. Navigating the overgrown path to the boiler room felt like stepping into another dimension. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like old rust mixed with faint decay. The utility tunnel grate, half hidden by overgrown ivy, groaned as Alex pulled it open. Cold, stale air rushed out, smelling like forgotten dust and something else, ... Something vaguely sweet, yet sickening. One by one, you squeezed through the narrow opening. Your boots crunched on loose gravel and bits of broken glass. The tunnel was long, dark, and claustrophobic, and the beams of your flashlights danced wildly across cobweb-draped pipes and grimy walls, creating dancing shadows that seemed to mock your intrusion. You could hear your own heartbeat thrumming in your ears. Finally, the tunnel opened into a large, cold space. The West Wing. It was an old gymnasium, or what was left of it. The wooden floor was warped, splintered, and covered in a thick layer of dust. Broken windows stared out like empty eyes. The basketball hoops hung drunkenly, the nets long gone. A fine, persistent mist seemed to hang in the air, even though there was no visible source of humidity. "Okay," Alex whispered, his bravado fading slightly. "Let's explore. Stay together." You started across the massive room, your flashlights cutting paths through the gloom. Every creak of the old wood under your feet echoed unnervingly. Every distant groan of the building settling sounded like a tortured sigh. You spotted what looked like old bleachers collapsed in on themselves, and further in, a doorway leading to what must have been the locker rooms. As you approached the doorway, a sudden, sharp drop in temperature hit you. It wasn't just cold. It was an unnatural, profound chill that seeped into your bones, making your teeth chatter. The hair on your arms stood on end. "Did you feel that?" Sarah whispered, pulling her arms around herself. Before anyone could answer, a faint, almost imperceptible sound drifted from the locker room. A whisper, just one word, too soft to make out, but undeniably there. "Hello," Alex called out, his voice cracking slightly. Silence, then a low, guttural scraping sound. Screech. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across concrete, right inside the locker room. Your blood ran cold. Let's check it out," Alex said, trying to sound brave, but his flashlight beam trembled. You followed, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. The locker room was even worse. Rows of rusted, dented lockers stood like skeletal figures. The air here was even colder, thick with a cloying scent that reminded you vaguely of old, dried blood and roses. The scraping sound had stopped, but now you heard a rhythmic drip, drip, drip. Somewhere in the darkened shower stalls at the far end. "Whoa," Sarah breathed, pointing her light. On the grimy floor, near a locker marked with faded spray paint that read Emily, was a single, fresh red rose. Its petals were just starting to curl brown at the edges, as if plucked recently. But how? This wing had been sealed for decades. As you stood there, staring at the rose, the whispers returned. This time, clearer. "Help me, ... It was a young girl's voice, filled with an unbearable sorrow and a chilling plea. It seemed to come from all directions at once, echoing off the metal lockers. Suddenly, a locker door, 3 down from Emily's, slammed open with a deafening bang. Your flashlight beams jerked to it, revealing nothing but empty space inside. But then, a faint, translucent figure shivered into view, hanging in the air just inside the locker. It was a girl, dressed in what looked like 1970s clothes. A floral dress, long hair. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow, fixed on you with an expression of profound agony and rage. "You... she rasped, her voice a dry, papery whisper that seemed to claw at your ears. "You saw... Before you could even process what you were seeing, her mouth opened impossibly wide, and a silent, primal scream tore through the air. You felt a searing coldness pass through you, and a sharp, sickening pain in your temples, as if she was trying to force something into your mind. A flash of images, dark hallways, a hidden door, a shadowy figure, a struggle, then nothing but blackness. "Run," Alex screamed, finally snapping out of his terrified trance. You didn't need to be told twice. All three of you spun around, stumbling over each other, flashlights bouncing wildly. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, chasing you. "Don't leave me." Emily's voice was no longer pleading. It was filled with a desperate, terrifying fury. Pounding footsteps echoed behind you, impossibly fast. You glanced back, heart leaping into your throat. A swirling, dark mist was coalescing into a vaguely human shape, tearing through the locker room towards you. It was Emily, and she was fast. You burst out of the locker room, across the old gym floor, the splintered wood creaking menacingly under your fleeing feet. The whispers followed, surrounding you, clawing at your sanity. "She wants to show you. She wants you to stay." You scrambled back into the utility tunnel, pushing and pulling, desperate to escape. The instant you were all through, Alex slammed the grate shut, the metal shrieking in protest. You landed on the cold ground, gasping for air, your lungs burning, your legs shaking uncontrollably. You didn't say a word, just ran, not stopping until you were miles from Oakhaven High. The oppressive shadow of the school finally out of your sight. You never spoke about what you saw in the West Wing. Not to your parents, not to your teachers, not even to each other, not really. Alex and Sarah were as shaken as you were, there, eyes holding the same haunted look. But sometimes, when you're walking through the school hallways, a chill runs down your spine. Sometimes, you hear a faint whisper behind you, just at the edge of hearing, even when no one else is around. And sometimes, you catch a fleeting scent of old roses and decay. You start to wonder, did Emily really just want to show you something? Or did she latch onto you? Did a piece of the West Wing, a piece of her, follow you out that night? And what was that figure she showed you in your mind? What really happened to Emily in the West Wing? The answers might be closer than you think. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, you swear you can hear a faint, distant scraping sound, like something being dragged across a concrete floor. Picture Northwood High, not exactly ancient, maybe built in the 70s, nestled in a quiet, unassuming town somewhere in Ohio. It had that perpetual musty smell of old textbooks and forgotten dreams. And like any old building, it had its legends. Most were just that whispered rumors of a phantom janitor, or the ghost of a student who failed math one too many times. Until this one Friday. Ronald, the quiet cynic with a sketchbook full of monsters, and Cassie, the perpetually curious, one who always checked under the do not enter signs, was stuck in detention. An absurd mix-up over a science project, but here they were, the last two souls left in the entire building, tasked with cleaning the library, Mr. Harrison, the history teacher, famous for his booming voice and even louder snores, was supposed to be supervising. But by 7 p.m., he was nowhere to be found, probably in the staff room, indulging in his nightly nap after releasing the other kids. The library was massive, a maze of towering shelves that reached almost to the ceiling. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light from the high windows, now barely illuminated by the dying sun. As Ronald dutifully wiped down a table in the main reading area, his phone clutched in his other hand, Cassie, true to form, ventured into the rarely used restricted archives section. It was always locked, a place where archaic-looking tomes and forgotten yearbooks gathered dust. But tonight, the chain was inexplicably undone, the heavy wooden door slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning. Ronald, what would you do if you heard a soft, almost imperceptible whisper from a place that should be empty? Cassie did. It was faint, like paper rustling, then a name, clear as day. Evelyn, she called out. "Hello, Mr. Harrison." No answer, just the oppressive silence of the library. Ronald, always the voice of reason, chalked it up to the building, settling, or maybe residual echoes from the day. But even he felt it, the inexplicable chill that snaked up his spine. Despite the stuffy air, Cassey, intrigued despite the goosebumps prickling her arms, pushed the door open further, revealing a narrow, dust-choked corridor lined with even older, smellier books. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of aged paper and something else, something metallic, like old blood or rust. She took a step in, her sneakers crunching softly on unseen debris. Her eyes scanned the floor, and she spotted something glinting in the gloom. A single, ornate locket, tarnished but beautiful, lying amidst the grime. As she bent down to pick it up, a guttural thud echoed from deeper within the archives. Thump, 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 slow, deliberate, like someone dragging something heavy across a wooden floor. Ronald, now convinced something was genuinely wrong, abandoned his cleaning, his phone forgotten on the table. He rushed over and grabbed Cassie's arm. "We need to go, Cassie, now." But as he pulled her, the locket in her hand grew impossibly cold, then radiated heat, burning her palm. She gasped and dropped it, and it landed with a soft clink on the wooden floor. Then the lights flickered. Not just a dimming, but a frantic, strobe-like chaos that plunged the corridor into disorienting darkness and blinding flashes. In one flash, Cassie swore she saw it, a figure at the very end of the corridor. Tall, slender, with long dark hair matted over its face and its arms. They seemed to stretch unnaturally, reaching, grasping. In the next flash, it was gone. Low, mournful wail filled the air, reverberating off the bookshelves, making their teeth ache. It wasn't human. It was something ancient, filled with sorrow and rage. Ronald fumbled for his phone, the screen flickering to life, but the service bars were gone. Nothing. Complete isolation. You're there with them, right? What's your first instinct? To run or to hide? They stumbled backward, trying to get out of the archives, but the heavy wooden door that led back to the main library, which had been ajar, was now slammed shut. A loud crack echoed from behind them. A bookshelf, impossibly tall, had toppled over into the archives, blocking the narrow corridor they'd just exited. They were trapped. Panic set in. Cassie, though terrified, was the first to connect the dots. She remembered the locket, the name Evelyn, she whispered, her voice barely audible over her ragged breaths. She frantically searched the debris from the fallen bookshelf, her eyes darting across old newspaper clippings that had fallen out of forgotten books. One headline screamed, "Missing, Northwood High student Evelyn Reed, minus 1,978. Another, local. Girl's disappearance remains mystery." A third, from a year later, Northwood High Library redesigned after tragic incident, new wing dedicated. This restricted archives section wasn't new. It was old. It was original. The new wing was built around it. This was the original library, and Evelyn Reed. She must have vanished here. As Cassie pieced it together, a bone-chilling cold permeated the air. Their breath plumed in front of them like it was the dead of winter. From the shelves around them, books began to launch themselves, not falling, but flying across the room, slamming into the walls, sending dust and paper fragments scattering. A heavy dictionary narrowly missed Ronald's head, embedding itself in the wall behind him with a sickening thud. What would you do in that exact moment? Freeze or fight? Suddenly, a chilling whisper was right in Ronald's ear, so close he felt a cold, moist breath. "You know." He spun around. Nothing. But Cassie pointed, trembling, to the far end of the archives where the figure had appeared earlier. A faint, greenish glow began to emanate from the floor. Slowly, agonizingly, a translucent figure began to solidify. It was a girl dressed in old-school clothes, her body contorted, her limbs elongated, her head hanging unnaturally to one side, long dark hair obscuring her face. But you could see the dark, empty sockets where her eyes should have been. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, or perhaps a silent plea. It was Evelyn, and she was reaching for them, her spectral fingers phasing through the air, leaving trails of icy mist. Ronald, despite his overwhelming fear, had an idea. A desperate flicker of hope gleamed from long nights watching horror movies. He grabbed a heavy, ancient yearbook, one dated 1978, from a nearby shelf. "Evelyn," he yelled, holding it out, his voice cracking. We know what happened to you." The spectral figure paused, its ethereal reach faltering. The mournful wail intensified, a sound of agony and recognition. Its head tilted, as if trying to see them through the matted hair. Cassie, though terrified, understood. "You were trapped here, weren't you? After they built the new section, you were forgotten." The air vibrated with an immense sorrow. The green glow intensified, then flared. The spectral Evelyn lunged forward, not at them, but towards a solid brick wall behind where she had materialized. Her translucent form passed through it, and a sound like breaking glass echoed from beyond, followed by a final, prolonged ear-splitting shriek that seemed to tear the very fabric of the building. Then, silence. The lights in the library flickered once more, then settled back to their normal, dim hum. The books on the floor were still scattered. The broken chain still lay on the archive door, but the overwhelming cold, the metallic smell, the sense of dread, it was gone. The main library door, which had been slammed shut, now just stood open. Ronald and Cassie, pale and trembling, stumbled out of the library, past the staff room where Mr. Harrison was still snoring loudly, oblivious. They didn't stop until they were out in the cool night air, the distant city lights a comforting beacon through their tears. They never truly told what happened in that library. How could they? Who would believe them? The official story. They accidentally locked themselves in, and Mr. Harrison found them an hour later. Cassie still has nightmares, and Ronald's sketchbook now includes a new, terrifyingly real monster. But here's the kicker, the part that keeps me up at night. A few months after that incident, Northwood High began renovations, and guess where they started? The old library wing. They reportedly found a previously undocumented, sealed-off section behind a brick wall, and within it, the remains of a skeleton, identified through dental records as Evelyn Reed, missing since 1978. They said it was an accident, a structural collapse that trapped her. But was it? Or was it something else? What do you think happened that night? Was it just a coincidence? Or was Evelyn finally able to find her way home, her silent screams echoing through time, thanks to two terrified teenagers who dared to listen? And now that you've heard this, do you feel any different about the locked-off parts of your school? Let me know in the comments. Sleep tight if you can.